We've been reading about Savitri's finding of her soul, and then subsequent to that, to the wonderful experience of uniting with the divine soul above, then she finds herself human again, back in the little hut in the forest, but she's aware of her soul within her subtle being, and that soul is calling to the Supreme Divine Mother to come down into Savitri's individual being and to make it her home. And so we read the wonderful description of how the Mother descends into Savitri's heart, and then there's a transformation of the whole being. The Kundalini force rises up the spine, it opens up each of the centers, it joins the higher center above the head, and then there's a transforming action on all these centers. So there's two pictures here which express that process. First the rising up, and then the blossoming of the centers. And we read a beautiful description of each of them. What is the change that comes about in the different centers? In the head, in the center of vision, in the throat, in the heart, in the navel, in the lower center, and the base of the spine. And then we saw how Sri Aurobindo, he told us the effect of this transformation on Savitri, but then he speaks generally. He told us that there's a secret soul supporting everything, and that secret soul which is supporting everything is the master and the witness of our ignorant life. And when these hidden doors, when these different centers in our being open up, then that veiled king, that ruler of nature, steps out into nature's front, and there's a great change comes about. Then sin and virtue leave the cosmic lists. They struggle no more in our delivered hearts. Our acts chime with God's simple, natural good, or serve the rule of a supernal right. All moods unlovely, evil and untrue forsake their stations in fierce disarray and hide their shame in the subconscious dusk. Then lifts the mind a cry of victory. O soul, my soul, we have created heaven. Within we have found the kingdom here of God, his fortress built in a loud, ignorant world. Our life is entrenched between two rivers of light. We have turned space into a gulf of peace and made the body a capital of bliss. What more, if more must still be done? In the slow process of the evolving spirit, In the brief stayed between a death and birth, a first perfection stage is reached at last. Out of the wood and stone of our nature's stuff, a temple is shaped where the high gods could live. Even if the struggling world is left outside, one man's perfection still can save the world. There is a new proximity to the skies, a first betrothal of the earth to heaven, a deep concordat between truth and life. A camp of God is pitched in human time. Who will read first today? Rosa?
Then sin and virtue leave the cosmic lists. They struggle no more in our deliberate hearts. Our acts chime with God's simple natural good, or serve the rule of a supernal right.
Yes. So, there's two difficult points about this sentence. He says that sin and virtue leave the cosmic lists. And here this word has nothing to do with shopping lists or lists of things that you have to do. The lists is the place where two champions come to fight in single combat. It's a space marked out for two champions to fight each other. It comes, I think, 4 times in the poem, this word. Yes? So there's a place marked out for the combat between sin, wrong behavior, and virtue, good behavior. That's very important in our human life, the choice between sin and virtue, what we feel to be right, what we feel to be wrong, what we feel to bring us closer to the divine, and what we feel to separate us from the divine. But here Sri Aurobindo is saying that when we have experienced the psychic realization, the soul realization, and the psychic transformation of the whole nature, then this idea of sin and virtue doesn't apply to us anymore. We no longer see it as part of the universal picture or way of things. So these opposites, sin and virtue, do not struggle anymore in our hearts. Our hearts have been delivered, they've been set free from that struggle between right and wrong, which can be so painful for human beings. Instead, our actions chime with, this is the other difficult point about this sentence. It actually refers to bells. Bells chime. And the people who make bells and play bells try to do it in such a way that they can be in harmony. So we use this expression to chime with, to mean in harmony, in accord with. So our actions will be in harmony, either with the simple, natural good that is normal to the world perhaps before the human vital and mental come and disturb the harmony, or else our actions serve a supernal right, a higher kind of good that isn't human virtue, which belongs to a higher transcendent realm. So this is a very wonderful revelation about the effect of the psychic discovery, which, if we can allow it to transform our whole nature, delivers us from this struggle between sin and evil. Suresh, you'll read next. Oh, we're going this way, sorry. Yeah.
All moods, unlovely, evil, and untrue, forsake their station in fierce disarray and hide their shame in the subconscious dust.
So when the psychic is ruling the nature, all these bad moods, these moods that are unlovely, ugly, that are evil, that are untrue, they just run away. They run away in shame. They don't dissolve completely at this stage. Instead, they hide themselves in the subconscious, and from there they may come up and bother us again. But that's where they go, down into the dusk, the darkness of the subconscious.
Disarray means? Disarray means?
Disarray. Yes, when armies run away, they break their ranks, they're no longer in order, they are in disarray, in confusion, they run away. So they had their station, there were their places where they were fixed, but now they have to run away from those places in disorder. And they hide their shame. They feel ashamed, and they hide that shame of being unlovely, being evil and untrue. And then the mind feels very triumphant. Mila, would you read it?
Then lifts the mind a cry of victory. O soul, my soul, we have created heaven. Within we have found the kingdom here abroad. His fortress built in a loud, ignorant world. Our life is exchanged between two rivers of life. We have turned space into a gulf of peace and made the body a capital of bliss. What more, if more must still be done?
So he doesn't say that this is what the soul feels. He says this is what the mind thinks. The mind thinks a great victory has been won. Well, a great victory has been won, of course. But the mind feels like celebrating it. And it congratulates the soul. It says, "Oh, soul, my soul, we have created heaven. We have found within the kingdom of God, here in this world." That's the feeling, perhaps, it gives us, this finding of the soul. We have built God's fortress, a strong place, a fortress that can resist attack. We have built a fortress in this noisy, ignorant world. And we feel that our life is protected. If we build a fortress, it will be good if we can build it between two rivers, because it means on at least two sides and maybe on three sides we are protected. And these are not just ordinary rivers, these are energies of light. I suppose these must be energies of light and truth within and outside, protecting the outer being. So the whole of space seems to have turned into a gulf, a deep, like a sea of peace. And the body, this human body, has become a capital of bliss. Now when we see this word, we think of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., where the U.S. government is established. But they have called it Capitol like that because that was in ancient Rome, that the seat of the government was built on a hill called the Capitol. And we speak about a capital. It's something similar, it's connected. The capital city of a country, or if you have a tall column, it may have a decorated capital on the top which supports the building then. So the mind feels that, oh, this being has become like a fortress, and this body is a center, a governing center of bliss, of ananda.
In the slow process of the evolving spirit, in the brief state between death and birth, a post-perfection stage is reached at last. Out of the wood and stone of our natural stock, a temple is shaped where the high gods could live.
Yes. So what has happened in the slow process of evolution? The spirit in nature unfolding its capacities. In that slow process, in this brief, he uses the word stayed. In the next line we have stage. The word stayed, it comes from the word that the Romans used to measure the distances of their roads. And every stade or stadium or stada, there was a place where you could change your horses and get some refreshment, take some rest. So Sri Aurobindo says this distance between a birth and a death, this distance, this time of a human life, it's like a stage in our evolutionary journey. So in this space of time, a first perfection stage is reached at last. We've been evolving for so long and through so many lives, but that life in which we have the psychic realization and the psychic transformation, that's a very, very important state or stage. It's not the only one, but it's a very important one. A first perfection stage is reached at last. And out of our nature, he speaks of the wood and stone of our nature, the matter and the living matter of our nature. The body and the individual being becomes a temple where the high gods could live. All the high cosmic beings who are working for the evolution, for the fulfillment, they can make a kind of base out of this being in which the psychic transformation has been established. Sergei.
Even in the strongest world is left outside. One lacks perfection, it must say the world. There is more a near proximity to the skies. A first betrothal from the earth to heaven. A deep concordance between truth and life. A kind of God is speech and human time.
So in the individual in whom this process has happened, even if they have very little communication with the rest of the world, even if the struggling world is left outside, that perfection, that first stage of perfection which they have reached, can save the world. Perhaps not completely, but help to contribute to save the world. And in that person, in their nature, in their being becomes unified. No? There is a new proximity to the skies. Proximity is closeness, nearness. So the skies, to the higher levels of consciousness. A first betrothal of earth and heaven. A betrothal is not a marriage. It is an agreement to marry. An agreement that the two young people belong together and that they will marry. So this is the coming together, the beginning of the union of the material world with the higher worlds. And he says a deep concordat between truth and life. A concordat is a kind of agreement, a treaty, an agreement of friendship and mutual support. So truth and life in our ordinary experience often seems to be struggling or opposing each other. But with this realization, they can work together in harmony. And this is an experience like a camp of God, a safe place. A camp is not a permanent place. It's a place where you stay for some time, but it can be a base for further conquests. A camp of God is pitched in human time. This verb to pitch is the verb that we use for setting up a tent. Pitch a camp of God in time, in human time. Of course, God has his tents pitched all over the place in other time, in subtle time. But this is in human time, in the earth evolution. Anybody would like to ask anything about this passage before we go on to the next one?
The idea for me of this, out of the wood and a stone, of our natural stuff, buildings, wood and stone.
Well, I think the distinction is that stone is matter and wood is living matter. But often a temple, it will be built not only of stone, but also of wood. At least some parts will be made of wood. So he says the stuff, the substance of our human nature, it has these two parts in. It's got wood and it's got stone. But together they can build a temple where the higher powers of consciousness, the higher forces, can find a base that can be worshipped and given a place.
I thought it would maybe the flesh and the bones,
Yes, well, it's sometimes we think like that, that the bones seem to be almost like stone, but in fact bones are also living matter, no? But our whole base is in non-living matter. In fact, nowadays I think they realize more and more there's the boundaries between these states are less and less clear. But here he uses these two words because these are two materials that we might build a temple out of. So now we come to Canto 6, which shows us Savitri in a completely new development of her sadhana. The theme of this quite long canto is nirvana and the discovery of the all-negating absolute. And this is not always a very easy canto. But before we come to this discovery of the all-negating absolute, first of all, there's a description of what this psychic transformation means for Savitri in her life. That covers the first 2 pages. Let's see how much we can read today. First of all, I will read some lines. A calm, slow sun looked down from tranquil heavens. A routed, sullen rear guard of retreat, the last rains had fled, murmuring across the woods, or failed, a sibilant whisper mid the leaves. And the great blue enchantment of the sky recovered the deep rapture of its smile. Its mellow splendor, unstressed by storm-licked heats, found room for a luxury of warm, mild days. The night's gold treasure of autumnal moons came floating, shipped through ripples of fairy air. And Savitri's life was glad, fulfilled like earth's. She had found herself. She knew her being's aim. Although her kingdom of marvelous change within remained unspoken in her secret breast, all that lived round her felt its magic's charm. The trees' rustling voices told it to the winds. Flowers spoke in ardent hues an unknown joy. The birds caroling became a canticle. The beasts forgot their strife and lived at ease. Absorbed in wide communion with the unseen, the mild ascetics of the wood received a sudden greatening of their lonely muse. This bright perfection of her inner state poured overflowing into her outward scene, made beautiful dull, common, natural things, and action wonderful and time divine. Even the smallest, meanest work became a sweet or glad and glorious sacrament, an offering to the self of the great world, or a service to the one in each and all. Joel, I think it's your turn.
A calm, slow sun looked down from tranquil heavens. A routed, sullen rear guard of retreat. The last rains has fled, murmuring across the woods, or failed, a sibilant whisper amid the leaves, and the great blue enchantment of the sky recovered the deep rapture of its smile.
Thank you. Again and again in the poem, we find Sri Aurobindo telling us what time of year it is. And Savitri had started on this adventure of the discovery of the soul at the end of the rainy season. The rain was still coming down, but intermittently. But now, with this experience, the rains have come to an end. The last rains have passed. And it is the very beautiful season after the summer rains. I always think of it as a kind of springtime, although it's actually autumn. So the sun is somehow very peaceful, moves slowly, the sky is clear, there's no troubled clouds about. And he says that the rains have left like an army running away. The rear guard are the people, the soldiers at the back of the army. They have to protect the rest as they are moving away. And the rains have been routed. They've been chased away. A sibilant whisper. It's as if something is hissing the last rain in the leaves. And the sky is smiling again. Patricia.
Its mellow splendor, unstressed by storm-licked beats, found room for a luxury of warm, mild days. The night's gold treasure of autumnal moons came floating, shipped through ripples of fairy air. And Savitri's life was glad, fulfilled like earth's. She had found herself. She knew her being's aim.
Thank you. Before the summer rains come, there's these storm-licked heats. No, there's very intense heat and occasional thunderstorms. But now it's not like that. And now it is mellow, which is a word we particularly use in connection with autumn, when everything is ripe and soft and not too hot and not storm-licked. And also particularly appropriate to the autumn, it's not only these lovely, gentle, mild days that are not too hot. There's also in the evenings the most beautiful moons of the year, the autumn moons, the moons of September, October, even November before the rains come. These are the harvest moons. The moon seems to be bigger and brighter than at other times of the year. And these golden moons, it's as if they come like ships on a wonderful sea, ripples of fairy air, some magical expression. So a beautiful poetic expression of autumn. And in correspondence with that beautiful weather, there's Savitri's feeling. Her life was glad. She found her fulfillment. She's found herself. She knows her mission and her aim. So that is a wonderful this brings a great happiness, but a mild, gentle kind of happiness. You will read, please?
Although her kingdom of marvelous change within remained unspoken in her secret breast, all the object round her felt its magic charm. The trees rustled, voices told into the winds, flowers spoke in ardent hues and unknown joy. The birds caroling became a canticle, and beasts forgot their strife and lived at ease.
So in all kinds of poetry from all cultures, we sometimes find that the poet will make a comparison between the atmosphere and the feelings of the human beings, and it's as if nature is in sympathy with that. So here, that's how it is. She doesn't speak to anyone about what has happened to her, but it's as if it has an influence on everything around. All that lived round her felt its magic's charm. That change that has come to her seems to be expressed in nature. It's as if the trees, with the gently moving their leaves, they are speaking about it. And the flowers in their beautiful colors, they seem to express her happiness. And even the birds, the songs of the birds, seem like a sacred hymn. And most astonishing of all, the animals, the wild animals, they also live in peace with each other. Sri Aurobindo speaks of this somewhere else in the poem, a little later on, when Savitri on her quest comes into the... No, it's further back. Comes into the foothills of the Himalayas, and there are holy men living, and there even the wild beasts are peaceful and tame. And then Sri Aurobindo speaks about the people who are living around in the wood there, Bhavana.
Absorbed in wild communion with the unseen, the mind
Ascetics.
of the wood receive a sudden greatening of the lonely mood. This bright perfection of her inner state, overflowing into her outward scene, made beautiful, done, common, natural thing and action wonderful and time divine.
Yes. So those ascetics, these are the people who have left the world in order to practice tapasya, and they are absorbed, communing with the unseen through nature. They are very mild people. They have goodwill towards all beings. They feel a sudden greatening of their lonely muse. There they are, absorbed, communion with the Supreme, but something influences them and they feel that they can reach a higher state. And this bright perfection of Savitri's inner state, it's as if it overflows into all this outward scene around her, so that dull, common, natural things become beautiful, and actions, even ordinary actions, become wonderful, and time feels divine. Alice.
Even the smallest, meanest word became a sweet, glad, and glorious sacrament, an offering to the self of the great world, or a service to the one in each and all.
Again, this is a typical experience of the psychic state, that even the smallest action, scrubbing the floor or sweeping or anything, becomes a kind of sacrament, communications, an action that we do that puts us in contact with the divine. And that may happen in a very sweet way, or even in a stronger, glad and glorious way. May be experienced as an offering. Whatever little act is done is an offering to the self of the great world, or another way of experiencing it is as a service to that one divine who is living within everything. So, this is the ideal way to be a housewife, for instance. All these things that you have to do, peeling the potatoes or doing the washing up or the clothes or whatever. If this can be felt, that this is something that you are doing as an offering to the Supreme, or as a service to the One Self in all.
This happens sometimes when you feel joyful, inner peace. You could do things with happily, not mourning or the
Yes.
doing everything with a joy.
Yes. I think in her talk, Dr. Premananda Kumar told about complaining to her father that why have you given me such an education and then made me study Savitri, and all I'm doing here, I'm just a housewife, I can't leave the house because of my young children, and I have to look after my mother-in-law and all that. And he told her, but it's for this that I made you study Savitri, so that you could do all this as an offering to the self of the great world, or a conscious service to the One in all.
For any work it applies.
For any kind of work it applies, yes. But we tend in our mental stupidity to make a distinction between different kinds of work. We think if we are studying or teaching or writing or doing research, that's a better kind of work than sweeping the floor. But that's nonsense. It's not really like that. And Bebel.
Night invaded all from her being's life. Her heartbeat stems from an deep bliss. Happiness grew heavier, shared with her by her touch. And grief sunk solace found, and she drew near.
Yes. So that light that she's carrying with her, that joy and that peace, it spread to everyone around her. And that bliss which is in her heart gets communicated. So if people are feeling happy, they feel happier if they share their happiness with her. And if they are feeling sad, her touch comforts them. It gives solace, comfort. The feeling of unhappiness and grief just disappears when she comes near. You'd read there?
Above the
Cherished.
hand of Shraddhavan. She saw not now cats, dog, and little earth, a golden circle round a mystic sun. This was to her new world
Predicting
sight. The sight
Yes.
Rondeur of a
Yeah?
sovereign life.
Yes, sovereign life. Yeah. So before she was feeling so unhappy about Shraddhavan, that he's destined to die. But now in this state that she's in now, she doesn't see that dark circle around, that dark aura around his head that says this boy is doomed to die. Fate's dark and lethal, something that's lethal kills you. She doesn't see that around his head. Instead, she sees a golden circle round a mystic sun. So that is revealing to her inner sight. Sri Aurobindo says her newborn predicting sight. If we predict something, it means that we see into the future. We can say something about the future. So as a result of this psychic transformation, she can see some way into the future. She gets an indication. And instead of seeing Shraddhavan surrounded by this darkness of death, she sees this golden circle around a mystic sun. And this is the revelation of the cyclic rondure of a sovereign life. So this word cyclic, it's the same as we have in our cycle. It has to do with the wheel. It suggests that Shraddhavan's going to live a very full life. It's not his life is going to be cut off short. He's going to live a full cycle of life, from youth to maturity to grand old age, and then a great departure. That fulfills the whole cycle of a life that is sovereign, a life that in which he is a ruler. He will be a great king. This is what she foresees with this newborn predicting sight. So she no longer feels sad about Shraddhavan. She feels that he will live a long, full life, and she with him.
Meaning of rondure?
Rondure is something round, and it spoke about fate's orb. That's something complete. It's not just a circle, it's a sphere. In the same way, this rondure, it's the roundness, the curve of a sovereign life. Suresh.
In her visions and deep it vertical dreams. In brief shiftings of the future TV screen, he lay not by a dolorous decree, the victim in the dismal until of death, or grown to peaceful reason apart from her, forgetting the sweetnesses of death's warm life, forgetting the cosmic onenesses of love plus absorbed in the self-immortal bliss.
Yes. So this is how she's not seeing him. Before, perhaps, sometimes she saw him like this, lying a victim in the dismal anther. An anther is a cave, as if he's been killed. He's there in the dark cave of death, lying. And that there, if the body is lying like that, he would have gone somewhere else. He would have forgotten about the sweetness of life on earth and the warm days' delight here, and forgetting about their love, the passionate oneness of love's clasp. Maybe that would all be dissolved in the bliss which an immortal soul feels when it has left the earth behind. Then he would forget her. But Sri Aurobindo says she didn't see him like that. Instead, she saw him in a different way. You read it, Dhanalakshmi.
Always he was with her, a living soul, that met her eyes with close, enamored eyes, a living body near to her body's joy.
Yes. So this is what she sees when she looks into the future, that Sattyavan will always be with her, a living soul, not a soul who's left the earth. And he would still be meeting her eyes. She'd be able to see him, and he would be looking at her with close, enamored eyes. Enamored means in love. So eyes that look into her eyes from close by, not far away in some heaven, full of love. So that's how she sees him, a living body close to her body, which is so happy and joyful to be close to him. So we have to stop there today. Then sin and virtue leave the cosmic lists. They struggle no more in our delivered hearts. Our acts chime with God's simple, natural good, or serve the rule of a supernal right. All moods unlovely, evil and untrue, forsake their stations in fierce disarray and hide their shame in the subconscious dusk. Then lifts the mind a cry of victory. O soul, my soul, we have created heaven. Within we have found the kingdom here of God, his fortress built in a loud, ignorant world. Our life is entrenched between two rivers of light. We have turned space into a gulf of peace and made the body a capital of bliss. What more, if more must still be done? In the slow process of the evolving spirit, in the brief state between a death and birth, a first perfection stage is reached at last. Out of the wood and stone of our nature's stuff, a temple is shaped where the high gods could live. Even if the struggling world is left outside, one man's perfection still can save the world. There is a new proximity to the skies, a first betrothal of the earth to heaven, a deep concordat between truth and life. A camp of God is pitched in human time. A calm, slow sun looked down from tranquil heavens. A routed, sullen rearguard of retreat, the last rains had fled murmuring across the woods, or failed a sibilant whisper mid the leaves. And the great blue enchantment of the sky recovered the deep rapture of its smile. Its mellow splendor, unstressed by storm-licked heats, found room for a luxury of warm, mild days. The night's gold treasure of autumnal moons came floating, shipped through ripples of fairy air. And Savitri's life was glad, fulfilled like earth's. She had found herself. She knew her being's aim. Although her kingdom of marvelous change within remained unspoken in her secret breast, all that lived round her felt its magic's charm. The trees' rustling voices told it to the winds. Flowers spoke in ardent hues an unknown joy. The birds' caroling became a canticle. The beasts forgot their strife and lived at ease. Absorbed in wide communion with the unseen, the mild ascetics of the wood received a sudden greatening of their lonely muse. This bright perfection of her inner state poured overflowing into her outward scene, made beautiful, dull, common, natural things, and action wonderful, and time divine. Even the smallest, meanest work became a sweet or glad and glorious sacrament, an offering to the self of the great world, or a service to the one in each and all. A light invaded all from her being's light. Her heartbeat's dance communicated bliss. Happiness grew happier, shared with her by her touch. And grief some solace found when she drew near. Above the cherished head of Shraddhavan, she saw not now fate's dark and lethal orb. A golden circle round a mystic sun disclosed to her new-born predicting sight the cyclic rondure of a sovereign life. In her visions and deep-etched veridical dreams, in brief shiftings of the future's heavy screen, he lay not by a dolorous decree, a victim in the dismal anther of death, or borne to blissful regions far from her, forgetting the sweetness of earth's warm delight, forgetting the passionate oneness of love's clasp, absolved in the self-wrapped immortal's bliss. Always he was with her, a living soul that met her eyes with close enamored eyes, a living body near to her body's joy.